The rain had been falling for 3 hours before Ruth Calloway decided she was done waiting for it to stop. She stood at the small window above the kitchen basin watching water run in crooked lines down the glass, each stream splitting and rejoining as it pleased, going where gravity told it to go and nothing else. Outside, the single lantern above Millhaven's general store swayed on its hook. The light it threw was yellow and sick-looking, barely reaching the mud of the main street before giving up entirely. It was that kind of town. Everything in it gave up eventually. Ruth turned back to the basin and finished the last of the supper dishes. The boarding house was quiet now. The 3 men who rented the front rooms had eaten, belched their satisfaction into the common room air, and retired. Mrs. Vera Osgood, who owned the place and whose back had been sending her to bed earlier and earlier each week, had gone up at 8. The kitchen belonged to Ruth for another hour, maybe 2, and she used that time the way she used most things people left behind, without thinking about it. Carefully, without waste. She dried the cast iron skillet and hung it back on its nail. She wiped down the worktop. She checked that the morning's coffee grounds were laid out in the tin so Mrs. Osgood wouldn't have to bend for them. Small acts, the kind that go unnoticed until they stop. She had been doing them for 2 years in this kitchen, in this town, in this particular life that had settled around her the way sediment settles at the bottom of still water. Not chosen exactly, just accumulated. The contract was in her apron pocket. It had been there for 4 hours. She had found it by accident, the way most things that change a life arrive. Her stepfather, Eldon Price, had fallen asleep in the chair by the common room fire after supper, which he did most evenings now that the cold had come early to Wyoming. His coat had slipped from his lap to the floor, and Ruth had picked it up to fold it over the chair arm because that was the kind of thing she did without being asked, the kind of thing that kept the peace, and the folded paper had fallen from the inside breast pocket and landed face up on the floorboards between them. She had read it before she understood what she was reading. Then she had read it again. The handwriting at the top was not her stepfather's. It was careful and small and belonged to someone who had written many such documents before. The language was the language of property and exchange. Her name appeared in the 3rd line, Ruth Ann Calloway. Below her name, a sum of money. Below the sum, a name she did not recognize. Harlan Wick of Chadron, Nebraska. Below that name, the date. Below the date, 2 signatures. One was Eldon's. The other, she did not know. She stood there long enough that the fire popped twice and Eldon stirred in the chair, and she folded the paper and put it in her apron pocket and walked back to the kitchen before his eyes opened. That had been 4 hours ago. She had made supper. She had cleared the table. She had washed the dishes. She had listened to the rain. Now she stood at the window with dry hands and a wet understanding of her situation, and she thought about what the document meant the way she thought about most problems, practically without the luxury of feeling sorry for herself until she had figured out what to do. The sum was real. The signature was real. The date on the contract was 11 days ago, which meant Eldon had been planning this for at least that long, possibly longer, and the whole time he had sat across from her at the supper table and asked her to pass the salt and said nothing. Harlan Wick was a name she had never heard, which told her Eldon had not thought it necessary for her to know the man before being handed to him. That detail, more than any other, told her everything she needed to know about how she was regarded in this transaction. She was not a person being introduced to a future. She was a debt being settled. She went to the small room off the kitchen that served as her quarters. It was barely large enough for a cot, a trunk, and a hook on the wall where she hung her 2 dresses and her coat. She did not light the lamp. She sat on the edge of the cot in the dark and took stock of what she had. There was the coat. There was a dress she could change into. There were $7.40 in the tin she kept under the false bottom of the trunk, savings from 2 years of work that she had never spent because she was always waiting for the right reason. There was a carpet bag she could pack in 10 minutes. There was her mother's pistol, a short-barreled .38 that had not been fired in 3 years, but that she cleaned and oiled twice a year because her mother had told her, "A weapon you don't maintain is a burden, not a tool." There was the contract in her pocket, which she was beginning to think of as something other than a document of her sale. A lawyer might call it evidence. She would figure out what kind later. There was also in the yard behind the boarding house Eldon's horse. Old Dusty, the gray roan that was too old for serious work and too familiar with people to be considered dangerous, standing under the lean-to in the rain with his head low and his ears back. He was 21 years old and had a hitch in his left foreleg and could not sustain a gallop for more than a quarter mile. He was also the only horse in Millhaven that she knew how to saddle in the dark. She did not let herself think about where she was going. Not yet. She let herself think only about the next step, and then the step after that, because she had learned that big decisions made all at once tend to collapse under their own weight. But small decisions made one at a time have a way of adding up to something. Step 1 was the trunk. Step 2 was the carpet bag. Step 3 was the coat. Step 4 was the pistol wrapped in a cloth and fitted into the side pocket of the bag where it would not shift. Step 5 was the $7.40. She paused at that. $7.40 to get from Millhaven, Wyoming to Fort Laramie, where she had heard there was work in the garrison kitchens. She had heard this from a freighter who had passed through in September and eaten 3 helpings of her stew and told her without being asked that the Army paid decent wages for a good cook and didn't much care what the cook looked like as long as the food was hot and regular. She had filed that information away the same way she filed everything she might need later, quietly, without telling anyone. $7 might get her there if nothing went wrong. Nothing was likely to go right. She pulled on the coat. The house was silent. She went down the back stairs, which did not creak because she had fixed the loose board herself in August, and through the kitchen and out the back door and into the rain. Dusty lifted his head when she came into the lean-to. She put her hand on his neck and stood with him for a moment in the dark while the rain beat on the roof above them. "I know," she said quietly. "You're old and it's raining and you didn't choose this either." He pushed his nose against her shoulder in the way he had always done, looking for the bit of dried apple she sometimes brought him, and she had nothing to give him, and she felt the particular sadness of that more keenly than she had felt almost anything in the last 4 hours. She saddled him anyway. She walked him out of the yard and down the alley behind the boarding house before she mounted so that his hooves on the wet ground would be muffled by mud and distance before she reached the main street. She did not look back at the building. Looking back is for people who have something to reconsider, and she had already considered everything she intended to. She turned Dusty north toward the mountains, and they moved into the dark together. She had been riding for 40 minutes before she heard the shouting behind her. It was not Eldon's voice. It was higher and younger, and it was coming from somewhere on the south end of town, and what it said, carried broken by distance and rain, was something about a horse. She did not stop. She leaned forward over Dusty's neck and urged him into the fastest walk his bad leg would allow, which was not fast enough to be called flight, but was faster than standing still, and the sound behind her thinned and was swallowed by the rain and the dark and the increasing distance of the mountains ahead. She kept going. She had not taken Eldon's horse. She had borrowed it. She intended to send it back once she was somewhere safe enough to send anything. She told herself this because it was true, and also because it was the kind of true that holds up under pressure, the kind she could say out loud to anyone who asked and not feel her voice change. And her voice not changing mattered. She had learned early that the moment your voice changes is the moment the other person knows they have something on you. Her voice was steady. The rain was not. By the time the lights of Millhaven had disappeared entirely behind her, the track she was following had turned from mud to something closer to running water. Dusty moved carefully, testing each step, and she let him set the pace because he knew his own feet better than she did, and she was not willing to push him past what he could give. She rode for another hour before she allowed herself to feel anything about what she had done. It wasn't relief exactly. It was more like the feeling after you've been holding your breath for a long time and finally stop. Not comfortable, not safe, just different. The pressure changing rather than disappearing. Ahead of her, the foothills of the Laramie Range rose against a sky that was black on black mountains darker than the clouds above them, and somewhere in those mountains there was weather coming that was worse than rain. She could feel it in the way the temperature had dropped in the last 20 minutes, and in the particular quality of the wind that had picked up from the northwest cold and without mercy. She pulled her coat tighter and kept riding. The contract was still in her pocket. She had not decided yet whether it was evidence or kindling. That decision could wait until she found somewhere dry. Dusty lasted until mid-morning of the following day. She had pushed him too long in the dark. She knew that. She had made the decision with full knowledge of what she was doing and had done it anyway because the alternative was stopping in the open in the rain with whoever had shouted about the horse still somewhere behind her. Bad choices made in the right order can sometimes add up to survival. She had been hoping for that. What she got instead was the gray roan going down on a slope that looked passable but wasn't the ground under a thin crust of vegetation, turning out to be loose shale that shifted under his back hooves, and then a lurch and a sliding, and a sound she had been dreading for 20 minutes, the wet snap of a foreleg giving way on terrain it should never have been asked to cross. Dusty did not scream. He was too old and too tired for that. He went down on his side with a heaviness that was almost dignified, and lay with his chest heaving and one eye showing white, and his breath coming in hard, abbreviated bursts that told her everything she needed to know. She stood over him for a moment. The rain had stopped sometime in the night, and the morning was gray and cold and very quiet, the kind of quiet that sits on mountain ground like something physical, like a presence rather than an absence. She took the pistol from the carpet bag. She did not look away. One shot. Clean. She stood there for a while after, not because she was frozen or undone by it, but because she thought he deserved at least that much from her. The acknowledgement of what he had been asked to do and what it had cost him. Then she took the saddlebags from the fallen horse. She took the rope from the saddle. She left the saddle itself because it was too heavy and she had too far to go. She slung the carpet bag over one shoulder and the saddlebags over the other, and she started walking. The terrain did not improve. She was not a woman who had spent much time in the mountains. Millhaven was a flat country town situated on a plain that gave you the mountains in the distance, every day the view of them so constant and so far away that they functioned less as real geography than as a kind of permanent scenery, the kind of thing you stop seeing because it's always there. She had looked at the Laramie Range for 2 years from the kitchen window and had never considered particularly what it was actually like inside them. What it was actually like was harder than she had imagined and colder than she was prepared for. The ground was not even. The trees gave no reliable sense of direction. Twice, she found herself angling back the way she had come, without realizing it, only recognizing the error when she passed a distinctive rock formation she had already passed once before. She corrected and kept going. The sun was somewhere above the cloud cover, useful for knowing that morning existed, useless for knowing which direction was north. She ate the last of what she had packed, a piece of hard cheese and 2 biscuits that had gone partly soft from the rain around what she judged to be noon. She drank from a stream she found by hearing before she saw it, kneeling on the bank, with her hands cupped the water cold enough to make her teeth ache. By mid-afternoon, the light had begun to thin toward the gray that precedes mountain dark, which comes faster and more completely than the dark of open country, and she had found nothing that could be called shelter. She was thinking about the rope, about what she could do with it, whether she could rig something between trees that might keep the worst of any night weather off her. She was thinking about this in the practical way she thought about most problems, as a question of available materials and the best use of them, when she topped a small ridge and looked down into a hollow below and saw the smoke. It was thin and pale, barely distinguishable from the low cloud sitting in the hollows, but it moved differently than cloud did. It rose in a column rather than drifting. It had direction. Something deliberate was making it. She stood on the ridge and looked at it for a full minute. Someone was down there. The possibilities arranged themselves without drama in her mind. It could be a trapper. It could be a prospector. It could be hunters or a freighting party that had pulled off the track to camp, or it could be someone who had been sent out from Millhaven to bring her back. The last possibility was real, and she did not push it aside. She assessed it. If Eldon had sent riders after her, they would have caught her on the trail last night while she was still on Dusty, or this morning when she was on foot and making poor time across bad ground. If they were ahead of her, they would have to have known which way she was going, and she had not known herself which way she was going until she was already going there. That argued against it being a search party. It did not rule it out. She looked at the sky. The light was failing faster now, and the temperature, which had been cold all day, was dropping in the way that means it intends to keep dropping. She had no shelter. She had a pistol with 5 rounds remaining. She had at last count the judgment to know when her options had narrowed to 1. She went down toward the smoke. She came in from the east side of the hollow, moving through the trees as quietly as wet ground allows, which is not very quietly, but was the best she could do. The smoke was coming from a low structure that was part cabin, part something she didn't have a word for, built into the hillside, the way a den is built, using the hill itself as 2 of its walls and adding timber and stone for the other 2. A lean-to ran off the side of it, and under the lean-to was firewood stacked high and orderly in the way that speaks of someone who has done this enough times to know how much they need. There was a fire outside as well as in, a small one built in a ring of stones with a flat rock set at its edge that was serving as a cooking surface. On the flat rock was a pan. In the pan was something that smelled like meat. The man sitting beside the fire was not looking at the meat. He was looking at his right boot, which was across his knee and at the seam that ran along its side, which he was repairing with a curved needle and a length of waxed thread. He was concentrating on this with the attention of someone who has done it many times, but still respects the work, and he had not heard her come into the hollow, or if he had, he was choosing not to show it. She stood at the edge of the trees and looked at him for a moment. He was a large man, broad through the shoulders, the kind of build that comes from physical work, rather than from anything intentional. His jacket was elk skin, well worn with fringe along the sleeves that had been repaired in several places with leather that didn't quite match. His hair was dark and needed cutting. His hands on the boot were steady. He looked like a man who lived here, not like a man who was passing through. She stepped out of the trees. He looked up immediately, not startled but present, the kind of attention that doesn't require a flinch to prove it's real. He looked at her. She looked at him. She was aware with the detached clarity that cold and exhaustion produce of what she must look like. A day and a night in the rain. Hours of walking through rough ground. Her skirt was caked with mud to the knee. Her hair had come entirely out of its pins sometime before noon, and she had not had occasion to do anything about it. She was carrying 2 bags and a rope and a pistol that she had not put away yet because she had not yet decided whether to. He looked at the pistol. Then he looked at her face. He said, "There's a chair." He pointed with the needle at a section of log that had been split flat on one side and set beside the fire. That was all he said. She looked at the log. She looked at him. She calculated the distance between them and the position of his hands, which were still holding the boot and the needle and were not moving toward anything else. She walked to the log and sat down. The fire was extraordinary. She had not understood how cold she was until the heat of it reached her, and then her hands began to shake just slightly in the particular way that means the body is catching up to something the mind has been managing on its behalf for hours. She put the pistol in her coat pocket. She did not take her hand off it. He went back to the boot. They sat like that for a while, the fire between them, the pan of meat beginning to spit at its edges. The light in the hollow was going fast now, the trees turning to silhouettes, the sky above them deepening from gray to something closer to blue-black. She said, "Do you have meat to spare?" "I do," he said without looking up from the boot. "I can cook." He looked at the pan on the flat rock, then at her. Something moved across his face that was not quite amusement but was in the general neighborhood of it. "I can see that cooking needs doing," he said. She almost said something sharp. She decided against it. She was cold, and he had not threatened her, and the fire was real. "I can cook in exchange for shelter for the night," she said. "I'm not asking for more than that." He finished the stitch he was working on and knotted the thread. "There's the cabin," he said. "You can have the far wall. I sleep near the door." "That'll do." He looked at her then fully in the way he had not quite done before. Not the appraising look she was used to, the one that started at her face and moved downward and arrived at conclusions before it had finished moving. This was different. It was the look of someone reading a situation rather than a person. "How long were you out there?" he asked. "Since last night." He nodded once, as though this explained the mud and the shaking hands and the rope, and went back to his boot without further comment. She moved toward the pan. The meat was venison cut in the rough pieces of someone who knew how to field dress an animal and cared more about not wasting the animal than about the presentation of the pieces. There was a small sack of cornmeal near the rock and a clay pot of rendered fat and a tin of salt. Not much. Enough. She worked. She had always worked best in the immediate demands of a task, the way some people lose their trouble in conversation or drink, and she had always lost hers in the particular absorption of making food, which required her hands and her attention, and left less space for everything else. She thought about the heat of the pan and the ratio of fat to meal and the way the venison needed to go last, or it would toughen. And she did not think for a few minutes about the contract in her pocket, or the dead horse on the slope above, or the man sitting 12 feet away who had given her shelter without asking her why she needed it. She served the food in 2 tin plates she found hanging inside the cabin door. He took his plate with a nod that was the closest she had seen him come to a social gesture. They ate. It was the best meal she had tasted in a long time, which she was aware was partly the hunger talking. But partly it wasn't. There was something about eating food you have cooked yourself in difficult circumstances that has a flavor nothing made in comfort can replicate. When he finished, he set his plate aside and said without preamble, "Silas Morrow." It took her a moment to understand he was giving her his name. "Ruth Calloway," she said. He nodded. "You're running from something or someone." It was not a question. She put her plate down. "I'm running towards something. Fort Laramie. There's kitchen work there." "That's north. You were coming from the southeast." He said this without accusation as a statement of observable fact. She had been turned around in the mountains, and she had known it, and he had simply named it. "I got off the track," she said. "Easy to do in these hills." "Is it far, Laramie?" He looked at the mountains above them, as if reading something in the dark shapes of them that she could not read. "On good ground on a horse that isn't lame 2 days, maybe 3. He paused. "On foot from here across this terrain." He paused again. "Longer." She thought about this. She thought about the money in her carpet bag and how far $7.40 stretched on foot across mountain terrain. "Is there a track from here?" she asked. "Something I can follow?" "There is." He looked at the fire. "You'd need to know where it starts." He said nothing more. She waited. "You can stay until you're rested," he said finally. "I'll show you where the track begins." "How long a walk?" "From here half a day," she calculated. "A rest. A half-day's walk to the track. Then the track itself." It was possible. It was not comfortable, but it was possible, and she had already demonstrated to herself today that she could move through discomfort. "Thank you," she said. He picked up the boot again and looked at the repair. "The stitching will hold," she said before she could stop herself. He looked up at her. "I can see you're worried about whether it will hold," she said. "The stitching looks good from here." He looked at the boot, back at her. "You can see a boot repair from 6 feet in the dark," he said. "I've done enough of them." He turned the boot in his hands, examining what he'd done with the critical eye of someone setting their own standard rather than anyone else's. Then he set it aside. "There's a blanket inside," he said. "Extra one on the shelf." She took the plates to where a bucket of water sat near the cabin door and washed them. He watched her do this without commenting, and she felt his attention the way you feel the presence of a large, quiet animal in a small space, not frightening but not ignorable either. She found the blanket on the shelf. It was wool-heavy and smelled of wood smoke and pine, and the particular smell of things that have lived for a long time in cold, which is not unpleasant. She laid it on the far side of the cabin against the wall and sat on it. From here she could see him through the open door, still sitting by the outside fire, his elbows on his knees looking at the dark. She took the contract from her pocket and looked at it for the first time since she had put it there. Eldon Price, Harlan Wick. Her name in the careful handwriting of a stranger. The sum that had been decided was appropriate for her. She did not find the sum insulting. She found the arithmetic insulting the calculation that had been made without her knowledge or consent that she was a problem with a price attached. She had been aware in the general way that a person is aware of what the world thinks of them when the world makes its thinking plain that she was not valued in Millhaven. Not by her stepfather, who had made it clear from the beginning that her mother's death had left him with an inconvenience rather than a daughter. Not by most of the town, which regarded her with the mild contempt that small communities reserve for people who don't fit the shape the community has decided on for them. She was too large, too plain, too direct, too accustomed to doing things for herself to be comfortable to be around, and people tend not to value what makes them uncomfortable. She had known all of this. She had known it by the ache of it when something pressed the particular dull awareness of a thing you have stopped expecting to go away. She had managed. She had cooked other people's food and fixed other people's boot stitching, and waited without quite knowing she was waiting for something that would give her a reason to leave. The contract was a reason, not the kind she would have chosen, the kind that arrives anyway. She folded it back into her pocket. Outside, Silas Morrow had not moved from his position by the fire. He was still looking at the dark in that way he had, as though the dark were something to be read rather than simply endured. She lay down on the blanket and pulled it over herself and listened to the fire outside, the small adjustments of burning wood and the wind that had picked up again in the trees above the hollow, and the complete and absolute silence of the mountains beyond these things. She thought about Dusty briefly. She hoped it had been quick. She believed it had been. She thought about Mrs. Osgood, who would come down in the morning and find the kitchen cold and the morning coffee not laid out, and would know from these absences that something had changed. She hoped the old woman's back was better. She hoped whoever cooked for her next learned the coffee grounds trick and the loose stairboard and the way the back door needed lifting slightly as you pulled it to keep the hinges from screaming. She thought about Harlan Wick of Chadron, Nebraska, who had paid money for a woman he had never met, and she wondered what kind of man does that. Then she thought it didn't matter. He was a problem for later. The fire outside shifted and popped. Through the open door she could see the edge of the sky above the trees, and in one small break in the cloud cover a handful of stars, cold and exact and indifferent to everything below them, which she found unexpectedly to be a comfort. The kind of comfort that has no warmth in it, but has honesty, which is sometimes what you need more. Silas Morrow came inside at some point. She heard him settle near the door, the shift of his weight, the quiet of someone who knows how to move in a shared space without disturbing it. She was already most of the way to sleep. She was aware at the edge of consciousness that she did not know this man, that she was in his cabin in his mountains, and she did not know the first thing about him beyond his name and the way he repaired his own boots and the fact that he had offered shelter without requiring explanation. She was aware that this was a situation that called for caution. She was also aware that she had checked every angle of it. She could check tonight, and the checking was done, and the body she had pushed for a day and a night through cold and rain and rough ground was making its own argument now, the simple, unanswerable argument of exhaustion. She slept. Outside, the stars disappeared again behind the clouds. In the hollow, the fire burned down to coals and the coals to ash, and the night moved through its hours the way it always does, without asking anyone's permission or consulting anyone's plans. The mountains held the hollow, the way they hold everything in them, with the same patience they have applied to centuries of weather and season and the small, urgent lives of everything that passes through their keeping. Ruth Calloway slept in a stranger's cabin on a borrowed blanket, with a contract in her pocket and a pistol within reach. She did not dream. Outside the hollow, something moved in the tree line, an animal going about its own business in the dark, indifferent to hers. The fire had gone to ash by the time she woke. She woke before he did. This was not a surprise. She had woken before everyone else for most of her adult life, first in her mother's house, where the mornings required managing before anyone else was ready to manage them. Then in the boarding house, where Mrs. Osgood's back had made early rising a necessity that fell, as necessities tend to do, to the person most willing to absorb it. Early morning had always felt like the only hours that belonged entirely to her before the day filled up with other people's requirements. She had never needed to be told twice to be somewhere quiet before the day filled up with other people's requirements. She lay still for a moment in the gray light that came through the single window, orienting herself. The smell of wood smoke and pine, the weight of the wool blanket, the sound of breathing from near the door, steady and slow, the breathing of someone who sleeps without complication. She rose quietly, found her boots, and went outside. The hollow in the early morning was a different place than it had been the night before. The cloud cover had thinned overnight, and the sky above the trees was pale and clear at its edges, the mountains to the north still dark, but their outline sharp. The fire ring held cold ash. The temperature was low enough that her breath came out in short white bursts, and the ground was stiff with the frost that had come in the last hours of the night. She found the woodpile under the lean-to. She found the kindling box beside it. She built the fire the way her mother had taught her, which was the way her mother's mother had taught her before, that small dry pieces first laid in a structure that lets air move through it, because fire needs to breathe the same as anything else alive, and then larger pieces once the small ones had taken. By the time the flames were established, she had also found in the lean-to beside the wood a covered tin bucket that held oats, and a second bucket with a lid that proved when she opened it to contain a quantity of dried berries and what appeared to be rendered bear fat. She was looking at these materials and calculating what could be made from them when she heard movement inside the cabin. He appeared in the doorway a few minutes later. He looked at the fire. He looked at her. He looked at the oats tin which she had set beside the fire. He said nothing. He went to the water bucket at the side of the cabin wall and washed his face and hands with the focus of someone who treats the small rituals of a day as worth doing properly. She said, "I found oats. I can make porridge if you have a pot." He looked at her again with that same quality of attention she had noticed the night before, the kind that takes its time and does not announce itself as looking. "Pot's inside," he said. "Hook above the hearth." She made the porridge. She made it with water and a small amount of the rendered fat stirred in at the end, which gives it a body that plain water won't, and she added the dried berries for the last 2 minutes over the heat so they softened without disappearing. She had no sugar. She had no salt to spare for something sweet. It was plain food made the best it could be from what was available. She served it in the 2 tin plates from the night before. He ate without comment, which she had already come to understand was his version of approval. A man who would say something if it was wrong and says nothing when it isn't is easier to read than one who performs satisfaction he may or may not feel. When he was done, he set the plate down and said, "I'm going up the north slope. Spotted a deer trail 2 days ago. I want to check before the ground hardens more." She nodded. He picked up his bow, which had been leaning against the cabin wall. She had not paid it particular attention the night before, but now in the morning light, she saw it was a serious piece of work. Not decorated, not made to impress anyone, made to function, its limbs smooth from long use, its string waxed and tight. He was halfway across the hollow before he stopped. He turned back. "Track to Laramie starts at the big split pine on the east ridge," he said. "You'll see it from the top of the hollow. Take the left fork when the trail divides. Don't take the right. The right goes up and dead ends at a rock face." She looked at him. "I thought you said half a day's walk to the track," she said. "To the start of it. I just told you where the start is." He walked on. She stood by the fire and thought about the split pine on the east ridge and the left fork and the direction of Laramie and the temperature, which was not getting warmer, and the $7 in her carpet bag and the fact that she had slept a full night for the first time in 2 days and was still not entirely recovered from it, the particular heaviness of a body that has been pushed and is insisting on accounting for every hour of it before it agrees to full function again. She thought about all of this. Then she picked up the tin plates and washed them in the water bucket and stacked them back on the hook inside the door and started putting the cabin in order because it needed doing, and she was here, and it was the kind of thing she did. He came back 4 hours later with a young buck across his shoulders, which he hung in the lean-to with the efficiency of someone who has done this work so many times that it has become its own kind of meditation. She watched him from the door of the cabin where she had spent the morning and the way she spent most of her time when not actively required elsewhere usefully. The cabin had not been in disorder exactly. It had been in the state of a place where one person lives alone, and that person is not interested in neatness for its own sake, but maintains a functional organization that only that person fully understands. She had not rearranged it. She had cleaned what could be cleaned and repaired what she could see needed, repairing a split in one of the window's oilskin coverings that let in cold air, a loose stone in the hearth surround that had been rocking on its mortar for long enough that the mortar had turned to powder and needed replacing with a mixture of clay and ash from the fire which she had packed in and left to set. She had done these things because her hands did not do well with nothing to occupy them, and because the tasks were there, and because being useful in a space she had found is a more honest way to understand it than simply looking at it. He stopped at the lean-to and looked at the cabin door from where he stood. "Window covering," he said. "The cold seam on the left side. I used pine pitch from your tin. It'll hold until it gets warm enough to do it properly." He was quiet for a moment. "Hearthstone was loose," he said. It was not quite a question. "Clay and ash. Give it a day to set before you let the fire get too hot on that side." He looked at her with an expression she was beginning to think might be the closest he came to being surprised by something. "You didn't go to the East Ridge," he said. "I'll go tomorrow." "You said you needed to get to Laramie." "I do." She looked at the deer hanging in the lean-to. "You have more work than one person can do in a day. I can be useful here for another day while I rest my legs. After that I'll go." He considered this the way he seemed to consider everything without rushing it. "In that case," he said, "I'll pay you in provisions for the road. Jerked meat and cornbread. Better than nothing for the trail." "Better than nothing is often the best available option," she said. He almost smiled. She was not entirely sure of it because it was gone so quickly, but something moved through his face that hadn't been there before. "I'll start on the deer," he said. "I'll start on the cornbread," she said. They worked on opposite sides of the lean-to for the rest of the afternoon and did not talk much, which suited them both. That was the end of what could be called the first day. The second day was similar to it in structure and different from it in texture, the way 2 days of the same weather can feel entirely unlike each other depending on what is said between the people living through them. On the second day, she found the newspaper. She was not looking for it. She had gone to the lean-to for more firewood, choosing pieces by weight and dryness the way her mother had taught her, and the newspaper had been under the second layer of the woodpile, folded to a quarter of its original size, its edges brown from exposure. It fell when she shifted the logs around it and landed face up on the ground at her feet, and she saw before she could choose not to the headline. Cheyenne Advocate, November 1873. 11 dead in Copper Ridge collapse. Inquiry finds no negligence. She picked it up because it was there, and because leaving a newspaper on the ground in damp conditions destroys it, and she set it on the shelf inside the cabin with the folded side out so that the headline was not visible, and she went back to the woodpile and finished selecting the logs she needed, and she did not think about it again until that night. That night she woke at some hour she could not identify the darkness in the cabin complete, and heard the sound that had woken her. He was outside. She could see through the open cabin door the faint glow of the fire he had relit in the stone ring, low and deliberate, and his shape beside it. He was sitting the way she had seen him sit before, elbows on his knees, but he was holding something. A piece of paper, not the newspaper. A single sheet, much folded, smaller than the newspaper had been. He sat with it for a long time. He did not read it. He had read it before many times, she thought, and now he was simply holding it in the way you hold something you cannot put down and cannot carry much further either. Then he put it in the fire. He sat and watched it burn, the paper curling and blackening, and then becoming nothing at all, and his face in the firelight was the face of someone discharging a debt they had been carrying for a long time. Not free of it, just done with a portion of it. She lay back down before he turned around. In the morning she made the porridge again, and she made it slightly differently, using more of the berries and less water, richer and warmer against the cold that had come deeper into the hollow overnight. She did not say anything about the fire or the paper. She served his portion in the tin plate and set it near him without comment. He looked at the porridge, then at her. She was already eating, looking at something in the middle distance beyond the fire ring. He picked up his spoon. After a while he said, "You found the newspaper." She did not pretend she hadn't. "It fell out of the woodpile. I've been meaning to burn it. I put it on the shelf." He looked at the cabin. "I see that." He ate another spoonful. "Copper Ridge," he said, and said nothing more. She waited. "I worked that mine," he said, "before I came here. I was a shift supervisor, which meant I was responsible for the men on my section of the dig. There were 11 men on my section the day the eastern shaft collapsed." He stopped. He looked at the porridge. 7 of them I had hired myself. I knew their names and what they did on Sundays and how many children they had. She did not say she was sorry. He was not telling her in order to receive sympathy. "The inquiry found no negligence," he said. "The owner's lawyers were better than anything the families could afford. I testified. I said what I saw, which was a section of shaft that had been flagged as unstable 6 weeks before the collapse and had not been reinforced, because reinforcing it would have required slowing the dig, and slowing the dig would have cost the owner money." He turned the tin plate in his hands. Nobody wanted to hear it. "What happened after?" "I lost the job, the week after the verdict." He set the plate down. "My wife had a small child by then. She didn't leave because she was cruel. She left because I couldn't find work in any mine in the territory, and she had a daughter to feed, and she made the decision a mother makes." He was quiet. I understood it. Understanding something and being past it are not the same. She thought about this. "No," she said. "They're not." He looked at her. "What are you running from?" She had been waiting for the question. Not because she had prepared an answer, but because she had known it was coming the way you know weather that's been building all day is going to break before dark. She took the contract from her pocket and set it on the flat rock between them. He looked at it without picking it up. "My stepfather," she said. "He signed that 11 days ago. Man named Harlan Wick put up the money. I found it by accident." He picked it up then. He read it the way he read everything without hurrying. He turned it over and looked at the back, which was blank, and turned it face up again. "He's not your father," he said. "No, my mother's second husband. She died 4 years ago. You have no other family. None that count." He set the contract back on the rock. "Eldon Price," he said, reading the name. "He owns a small freighting business out of Millhaven. He had debts. I was the asset he had that was easiest to move." She said this without bitterness and without self-pity because both of those things require energy. She had long since decided to spend elsewhere, and because stating a fact plainly is not the same as accepting it. He looked at her steadily. "You said you needed it for evidence," he said. "A lawyer might be able to do something with it. In Cheyenne, maybe. There's supposed to be a man there named Adler." She paused. "I heard that from someone passing through. I don't know if it's true." "Adler," he said. "Thomas Adler. He's real, old and difficult and not cheap but not dishonest. I know his name." He stopped. He was at the Copper Ridge inquiry. He was on the other side. But he was the only man in that courtroom who seemed to know what honesty was, even if his client didn't require it of him. She looked at him. "You know the lawyer who worked against you and you consider him honest," she said. "I know the difference between a lawyer doing his job and a lawyer lying," he said. "He was doing his job. He was very good at it. That's not the same as dishonesty." She thought about this. It was a more considered distinction than she was accustomed to hearing from anyone, and she filed it alongside the repaired boot stitching and the way he had said, "There's a chair," without making it something she owed him for. She picked up the contract and put it back in her pocket. "You should go to Cheyenne," he said. "Not Laramie. Laramie has kitchen work. Cheyenne has Adler. And kitchen work too, I'd imagine." She looked at the mountains to the north, calculating distances she didn't know well enough to calculate. "It's farther," she said. "It is. And the track from here goes either way, Laramie or Cheyenne." He picked up his bowl and finished the last of the porridge. "The Cheyenne route is better ground." She said nothing for a moment. "You know these mountains well," she said. 7 years. "Could you draw me a map?" He was quiet. "I could do that," he said. But he did not get up to draw it, and she did not ask again. And the morning moved into afternoon and the afternoon into evening, and neither of them mentioned Cheyenne or Laramie or the track that went either way. On the third day, the snow came. Not the serious snow. Not yet. A dusting that came in the night and lay thin and white on the ground outside the cabin, making the hollow look entirely different from the one she had walked into 3 days ago. She stood at the cabin door in the early morning and looked at it, this white version of a place she had begun to know in its brown and gray autumn colors, and thought about tracks through mountain terrain and what a dusting of snow does to them. He appeared behind her. "You'll want to wait a day," he said. "I know. Trail's passable after it settles, but you'd need to know which way the slope runs to keep from going sideways in the fresh." "I know," she said again. He looked at the snow. She looked at the snow. "I'll show you the bow today," he said, "if you want. The pistol's useful, but in these mountains you're more likely to need something quiet." She turned and looked at him. This was the most he had offered since the first night when the offer of shelter had been made in the laconic language of "there's a chair and there's the cabin." "All right," she said. They went up the east slope of the hollow to a flat area among the pines where he had set a target of bundled bark on a log. He showed her how to stand weight distributed the way the draw works from the back rather than the arm, which is counterintuitive until it isn't. He stood behind her and adjusted the position of her elbow, the angle of her shoulders, and she felt his hands on her arms, the way you feel something you are paying close attention to, which is to say entirely without the buffering that familiarity provides. She drew and released. The arrow went wide. He said nothing critical. He moved back to his position beside her. "Again," he said. She drew and released, still wide but less so. He moved to adjust her stance again, his hand on her shoulder this time. She turned her head and looked at his hand, and he removed it immediately, stepping back, and there was a quality to the way he stepped back that told her he had not been unaware of what he was doing, that it had been a considered physical gesture rather than a careless one, and the carefulness of the withdrawal was its own kind of information. "Sorry," he said. "You're fine," she said. "I'm not used to it." He said nothing to this. She drew again. "Tell me when I'm doing it wrong," she said. "I can't improve if you're being careful not to correct me." He exhaled slowly. "Elbow," he said. "Higher, and stop fighting the draw. The bow is doing the work. You're trying to help it and getting in the way." She adjusted. She released. The arrow hit the bark bundle, not center, but solidly. She lowered the bow and looked at the target. He looked at it too. "Better?" he said. They practiced for another hour without speaking much, the corrections coming when he saw something specific to correct, and the silences between comfortable in the particular way that silences become comfortable between people who are not performing anything for each other. Coming back down to the hollow, she said, "The Copper Ridge men, their families." He slowed slightly, did not stop. "What about them? Did you know what happened to them after?" "Some." He walked a few paces. "Caldwell's widow took the children to her sister in Colorado. Reyes I lost track of. The Garrity brothers, two of them, were both on my section. Their mother was living with the younger one's family. I don't know where she went." He was quiet. "I looked for a while, then I came up here and stopped looking because I couldn't do anything useful with what I found." She thought about this as they descended. "You came up here to stop hurting yourself with it," she said. He glanced at her. It was not an unkind look. It was the look of someone who has not had his own reasoning stated plainly back to him in a while. "Partly," he said. "Partly I came up here because there was nowhere else I could be without someone who knew about Copper Ridge looking at me as though I'd killed them myself." "You didn't?" "No. The owner did. In a manner of speaking. His profit margin did, which amounts to the same thing." They came back into the hollow. She rebuilt the fire while he checked on the drying venison in the lean-to. She put the water on to heat. She thought about owners and profit margins and the men on her stepfather's side of the freight ledger whose names he had never found it necessary to learn. That evening after supper, she took the contract out of her pocket and looked at it for a while. Then she looked at him. "Would you burn this?" she said. He looked up from the boot he was restitching. A different boot, the left one, which apparently also had opinions about its seams. "You said you might need it," he said. "I've been thinking about that." She turned the paper in her hands. "I need it. Adler will need to see it in person. A lawyer can't argue a document into void from a description." She looked at the fire. "But I don't want to be the one carrying it anymore." He looked at her. "You want me to hold it?" he said. It was not a question which told her he had already understood what she was asking before she finished asking it. "Until Cheyenne," she said. "Then I'll take it back." He set the boot down. He held out his hand. She gave him the contract. He folded it once without looking at it and put it inside his coat. "You didn't even read it again," she said. "I read it the first time," he said. That was enough. She looked at the fire. "Thank you," she said. He picked up the boot. She did not explain what she was thanking him for, and he did not ask, and neither of those absences felt like a gap. On the fourth day she woke at her usual time to find him already outside sitting by a fire that he had built himself for once, and she could see from the cabin door that he had in his hands the same piece of paper she had watched him burn 2 nights ago. And she understood then that the newspaper clipping was not the only document he kept and revisited in the small hours. She made the coffee. She brought a cup outside and set it on the rock beside him without speaking. He did not look up. She went back inside and she did not watch him through the window. After a while she heard the faint sound that she had heard the other night, the quiet sound of something being placed in a fire. He came inside with his empty hands and she gave him his porridge and they ate without speaking, and it was not a silence that required filling. Later, when she was washing the plates, she said without looking at him, "Who was she?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. "Her name was Margaret," he said. "She was practical, more practical than I gave her credit for a long time. She made the right decision for our daughter, which was not the same as the right decision for me, and it took me several years to stop confusing the two. She rinsed the plates. "Is your daughter well?" she said. "She's 7 now, living with Margaret's sister in Denver. I get a letter twice a year." He paused. "She drew me a picture of a horse in the last one. It looked more like a table with feelings, but the intention was clear." Ruth set the plates on the hook. She kept her back to him and straightened the plates on the hook with more attention than they required, which gave her face the time it needed to settle into something she was prepared to show. "That's a good thing," she said. "The letter." "It is," he said. She straightened the plates unnecessarily and turned around. His face was neutral in the way that comes after something has moved through it and settled. "I'll go tomorrow," she said, "if the snow is right." He looked out the window at the white ground. "I'll check the slope this afternoon," he said. "Let you know." He came back in the late afternoon and said the track was passable but would be better in another day. She said she would go in 2 days then. He nodded and said he had brought down a grouse and would she mind doing something with it that wasn't boiling because he was tired of boiled things. She said she would see what she could do, which turned out to be roasting it over the fire on a spit he helped her rig from 2 forked sticks and a straight branch basted with the bear fat and seasoned with salt and the dried herbs she found in a small tin on his shelf that she had not noticed before. They ate the grouse by the outside fire because the evening was still and the snow had given the air a quality of cleanness that made being inside feel like a waste. She said, "What do you do when the real winter comes?" "Stay in, hunt when I have to, read." He gestured toward the cabin. "There are books on the shelf." She had not noticed the books either tucked behind the tools and the tins. She would look at them before she left. "You don't go down to town at all. Once in spring for supplies, once in fall." He looked at the fire. "That's enough." "Enough, or all you can stand?" He considered the distinction with the seriousness he gave to most things. "Both," he said. "Sometimes they're the same." She pulled the last of the meat from the grouse bone and ate it. "I think Cheyenne," she said, "not Laramie." He did not say anything for a moment. "The better route goes south-southeast from the split pine," he said. "I'll draw you the map tonight." "All right." He looked at the fire for a while, then he said, "I'll take you to where the route becomes clear, half a day from here. After that, it's straightforward ground." She looked at him. "You said you'd show me where the track starts," she said. "You don't need to take me there." "The snow changes the landmarks," he said. "The description I gave you when the ground was brown is less useful now." She thought about this. It was a practical argument. It was also something else, but she was not going to name that unless he did. "Half a day," she said. "Half a day," he agreed. "Then you'll have it from there." She looked at the mountains above the hollow, dark shapes against a sky that was clearing now, the clouds pulling back to show a stretch of stars above the eastern ridge. "The sky's clearing," she said. "Temperature will drop tonight. It'll be colder walking in the morning. Colder, but clearer. Better to see where you're going." She looked at the stars. They were the same stars she had looked at through the cabin door on the first night, cold and exact and honest, in the way only things that have no stake in any particular outcome can be honest. She thought about Millhaven and Mrs. Osgood in the boarding house kitchen, and the morning she would not have been there to lay out the coffee grounds, and she felt the loss of it with the mild ache of leaving any place you have lived in. Not because it was good, but because it was known, and known places have a weight that unfamiliar ones don't, even when the familiar thing is not what you would have chosen. She thought about Cheyenne and a lawyer named Adler and kitchen work in a bigger town where nobody knew her stepfather's name or her own. She thought about this contract that had burned to nothing in the fire, the sum decided on the name written in a stranger's handwriting. And she thought about the way a thing that was meant to define you can instead become the exact moment you start to define yourself if you are paying enough attention to recognize it. The fire burned low between them. Neither of them moved to add more wood. The hollow was very quiet, and the stars above the eastern ridge were very clear, and presently she became aware that he was looking at the same stars she was looking at, not at the fire, not at the mountains, but at the same small section of the clearing sky. And she did not know what he was thinking about, but she thought that whatever it was It had in it something of the same quality as what she was thinking about, which is to say the feeling of a person standing at the exact point where one thing ends and something else has not yet begun. The stars said nothing about this being stars, but they stayed clear all the rest of the night, which was something. She had been in the hollow for 5 days before she understood what kind of man Silas Morrow was, not the surface of him. The surface she had read in the first hour the way you read any person whose actions are consistent with themselves, which is to say you watch what they do when they think no one is accounting for it, and you compare that to what they do when they know they are being watched, and you note whether there is a difference. With Silas, there was almost none. He repaired his boots the same way alone as he would have with an audience. He built the fire with the same attention at 4 in the morning as at noon. He cut the meat from a carcass with the same economy and respect, whether she was watching from the cabin door or not there at all. This kind of consistency is rarer than people imagine. She had seen enough of its absence to recognize its presence. What she had not understood until the 5th day was the thing underneath the consistency. The specific shape of the wound that had driven him up here and kept him here, and the way that wound had not healed exactly but had been worked around the way a person learns to walk differently after a break that did not set quite right. She understood it on the 5th day because of what happened with the gun. They had gone back to the flat area among the pines for another hour of practice with the bow. She was improving. Not in the dramatic way of stories where a natural talent reveals itself in a single session, but in the real way which is incremental and occasionally frustrating and marked by small corrections that accumulate into something better over time. Her 3rd shot of the morning hit the bark bundle solidly enough that he said good, which from him had the weight of a longer compliment from anyone else. They were walking back down when the sound came from the tree line to the east, a crashing uneven, the kind of sound that means something large moving through brush that is too dense for it and not caring about the noise it makes. Both of them stopped at the same moment. It came out of the trees 30 yards up the slope from them. A bull elk, young one antler broken off at the base from some fight she had not witnessed, bleeding from the shoulder where something had already taken a piece of him. He was not charging. He was hurt and confused and moving the way hurt animals move, with the momentum of pain rather than direction. He swung toward them. Silas had the bow in his hand, but there was no time to draw and set properly, not with the elk already moving at them, and she reached into her coat pocket without thinking about it and brought out the pistol and fired once high into the air above the elk's head. The sound stopped him. He stood for a moment, sides heaving, blood dark on his brown shoulder, looking at them with eyes that had in them the particular quality of an animal that is suffering and does not know why. Then he turned and crashed back into the trees. She lowered the pistol. Silas looked at her. She looked at where the elk had disappeared. He was already hurt, she said. Something got to him before. Cougar, most likely. He looked at the tree line. He'll go downhill and find water. Might make it. Might not. Might not, he agreed. They stood there a moment in the particular quiet that follows something loud and sudden. Her heart was doing what hearts do in those situations which she ignored because it was already doing less of it than it had been 30 seconds ago, and in a minute it would be doing less still. She put the pistol back in her pocket. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the neutral attentiveness she had come to read as his default, and not the almost amusement she had seen once or twice at the edges of something she said. This was something else. It was the look of a man recalibrating. You didn't think about it, he said. About what? The pistol. You didn't decide to reach for it. You just did. She thought about this. He was right. There had been no decision, only action, the kind that comes from the body rather than from whatever part of the mind makes choices. My mother taught me, she said. She said the time to decide whether to use a weapon is before you ever pick it up. After that, it's just mechanics. He was quiet for a moment. Smart woman, he said. She was. Ruth looked at the tree line. She died of something that had nothing to do with weapons or courage or any of the things she was good at. She died of a fever in February when the doctor was 2 days away in the wrong direction. Being capable doesn't protect you from everything. He said nothing. He looked at the place where the elk had been. No, he said after a long moment. It doesn't. They walked back down to the hollow. She knew from the way he had looked at her in the moment after the elk had gone that something had shifted. Not dramatically, not in the way that announces itself. In the quiet way that the most significant shifts tend to happen underneath the surface of the ordinary invisible until you look back later and understand that the thing you are now standing in began to exist at a specific moment, and the moment was that one. She filed it away and said nothing about it, and made the midday meal from the last of the roasted grouse and a handful of dried beans that she had soaked overnight. He ate and said that the beans needed longer, and she said she knew, but they had been out of time that morning, and he said she was right, and that was the end of it. After they ate, she asked him about the mountains, not as conversation, but because she needed to know, and he was the person who knew. She asked about the terrain between the Hollow and Cheyenne, the elevations and the exposed sections, and what the weather signs looked like up here when a serious storm was building. He answered all of it in the specific, unhurried way. He answered practical questions, the way of a man who respects useful information and does not withhold it. When he was done, she had a clearer map in her head than any drawing he could have made on paper, because the information was joined to his understanding of the particular character of each section of ground, the way the south-facing slope holds warmth longer, the way the creek crossing at the base of the second ridge is deceptive in its width, but shallow enough to ford if you know where. "You know this well," she said. "I've walked every part of it. Alone. Always alone." He looked at the mountains. "You think differently alone. Hear things you'd talk over if someone was with you." She thought about 2 years in the boarding house kitchen, the constant movement and noise of other people's requirements, the way silence was something she had to find in pieces between the demands of the day, rather than something she simply inhabited. "Or you think the same things louder," she said. He looked at her. "That too," he said. "That too for a while." She pulled her coat around her. The afternoon had turned cold again in the way that happens in the mountains, without warning the temperature dropping 10 degrees in the space of an hour as the sun moved behind the high ridge to the west. "You said you get a letter from your daughter twice a year," she said. "Do you write back?" "I do." "What do you tell her?" He thought about this for longer than she expected. "I tell her about the animals I see. The elk, the deer, a family of beaver that set up on the creek below the East Ridge last spring. She likes animals." He paused. "I don't tell her about the winter, or the way it feels some mornings when the cold comes in under the cabin door and there's nothing worth doing until the fire's hot enough to make doing anything possible." He looked at his hands. "She's 7. She doesn't need that." "No," Ruth said. "But you do. Someone to tell it to." He looked at her in that recalibrating way again. "Maybe," he said. "Not maybe," she said without harshness. "It's not a weakness to need to say the true things out loud occasionally. It's just what people are." He was quiet for a long time after that. She did not fill the silence. She had made her point, and she believed in letting points settle in their own time rather than covering them over with more words. When he spoke again, he said, "You should know there were tracks this morning on the East Ridge. Horse tracks, 2 sets coming from the south and going back the same way." She went very still. "You saw them this morning," she said, "before we went up to practice." "Yes." "You didn't say." "I wanted to look at them more carefully first, assess whether they were recent. And yesterday's, I think, maybe the day before. The snow preserved them." He looked at the East Ridge, invisible now in the falling dark. They circled the ridge and went back. Whoever it was didn't come down into the hollow. She thought about Harlan Wick and what a man who has paid money for something does when that something doesn't arrive as expected. She thought about hired men and the kind of work they do in mountain terrain in November, which is not comfortable work and therefore expensive work, which meant whoever had sent them had considered the expense worth paying. "They'll come back," she said. "Probably." "How many days before you think they return?" "Hard to say. If they know the area, they might try again tomorrow. If they don't, they'll need to resupply and get better information about these hills." He paused. "I'd give it 2 days, maybe 3. She calculated. "I should go tomorrow," she said. "The route will be clear by morning." He looked at her. "I'll go with you to the fork in the track." "You said half a day." "I did." He said nothing more. She looked at the hollow in the gathering dark, the lean-to with its stacked wood, the stone fire ring the cabin built into the hillside that was part of the hill now, after however many years he had been adding to it. She thought about leaving it. The thought had an unexpected texture to it. Not the smooth, clean feeling of a decision made and settled, but something with more friction than that. "All right," she said. "Tomorrow." He nodded. They went inside. That night she did not sleep well, not from fear, but from the particular wakefulness that comes before a significant departure. The mind rehearsing the logistics of what is coming, the body refusing to fully surrender to rest when the morning holds something demanding. She lay in the dark and listened to the quiet of the hollow and the sound of his breathing near the door, and she thought about Cheyenne and the lawyer Adler and the kitchen work that might exist there, and the life that might be constructed from those materials if she was careful and persistent and a little lucky. She thought about her mother, who had been careful and persistent and not lucky enough, and about the fever in February and the doctor 2 days in the wrong direction. And she thought about the particular unfairness of a world that takes capable women early and leaves lesser men standing, and she felt the anger of it briefly cleanly and then let it go, because carrying anger is expensive and she needed her resources for other things. She thought about Silas Morrow and the tracks on the East Ridge and the half-day's walk to the fork in the track that he had volunteered without being asked. She thought about a 7-year-old girl in Denver who drew horses that looked like tables with feelings and who received letters twice a year from a father she barely knew, who told her about beaver families and elk and did not tell her about the mornings when the cold came under the door. She fell asleep just before the sky began to lighten and slept for 2 hours, which was enough. The morning was clear and sharp as cut glass. She had her carpet bag packed before he was fully awake, the blanket folded on the shelf, the plates washed and hung, the fire built up and left to burn rather than damped because she would not be here to tend it, and there was enough wood inside to keep the cabin from getting too cold for the better part of a day. Small courtesies. The kind that cost nothing and mean something. He rose and dressed, and she made the porridge for the last time in that kitchen, using the last of the dried berries and a careful measure of the oats so that the tin was not emptied entirely, because she was not going to take everything from a place that had given her more than she had come looking for. They ate. He had packed provisions the night before while she slept, or perhaps while he was awake in those hours before dawn, the kind of preparation that happens quietly and without announcement. A cloth bundle that proved to contain jerked venison, 2 pieces of hard cornbread, a small tin of salt, and a handful of the dried berries tied in a scrap of cloth. It was enough food for 2 days of walking if she was careful, 3 if she had to be. He handed it to her across the fire. She put it in the carpet bag. "The bow," he said. He went to the corner of the cabin where a second bow stood shorter than the one he used, its limbs a darker wood. She had not noticed it before. He brought it to her along with a quiver of 6 arrows. "It belonged to a Shoshone man I traded with 2 winters ago. He left it when he went south and never came back for it. You're close enough to his draw weight." She looked at the bow. It was a serious piece of equipment, and she had practiced with one for 2 days, which was not enough to make her competent, and was more than enough to make her better off with it than without it. "That's a significant thing to give away," she said. "It's not doing anything here." She took it. She slung the quiver over her shoulder the way he had shown her. They left the hollow just as the light came fully into the sky, the trees casting long shadows across the snow that was still white and clean at this hour before the day's traffic of birds and small animals marked it up. He went first, reading the ground the way she had watched him read it all week, with a quality of attention that was not dramatic, but was total. She followed. They did not talk much on the climb out of the hollow. The ground required attention, and the morning required breathing, and neither of them was the kind of person who filled silence with noise when silence was doing the work. At the top of the hollow, he stopped and pointed east. "The split pine," he said. She saw it 50 yards away. 2 trunks growing from the same root parted at 6 feet, making a shape that once seen would not be mistaken for anything else. "And the fork," she said. "An hour's walk from here on the far side of the ridge." He moved again. "I'll show you." They crossed the ridge and descended its eastern side, the snow here less disturbed than it had been on the western face. The trees thinner, the view opening out to the south and east, and for the first time since she had entered the mountains, she could see distance again, the land falling away toward the plains in long, gradual steps, and somewhere in that direction beyond what she could see, Cheyenne, It looked possible from here. Most things look possible when the sky is clear and you can see where you are going. He stopped at the fork. The track divided around a limestone outcropping, one branch going north and upward toward a visible false summit, the other trending south-southeast following the line of a creek bed down through a gap in the trees. "Left fork," he said. "Stay with the creek on your right. When the creek bends sharp east, you leave it and hold south. There's a rock formation after about 2 miles that looks like a chimney. Once you see the chimney, you're past the difficult ground. From there it's open country and you'll find the wagon road before dark." She fixed it in her mind. Creek on the right. Creek bends east, leave it, hold south. The chimney rock, the wagon road. "All right," she said. He stood with his hands at his sides. The morning light was coming from the east now, and it was the particular light of high country in late autumn, angled and clear and without the warmth that same light has lower down, the kind of light that shows the exact shape of things without flattering any of it. She looked at him in it. He was looking at the fork in the track. "Silas," she said. He looked at her. She took a breath. "I'm going to say something and I need you to hear it as the true thing it is rather than as a pleasantry," she said. "I was in a bad situation when I came into that hollow. I don't mean the cold or being lost. I mean the situation underneath those things, the one I'd been in for 2 years, without quite admitting it to myself. What you gave me in those 5 days was not just shelter and food and the track to Cheyenne." She paused. "I don't have a neat way to say what it was, but I know what it was." He looked at her for a moment. "You gave me something too," he said. "The porridge was better than anything I've made in 7 years." She almost laughed. She came close to it. "That's a low bar," she said. "It is," he said. "But things that clear a low bar still clear it." She looked at him. "Come to Cheyenne," she said. She had not planned to say it. Or perhaps she had planned it in the wordless way that some plans form beneath the level where they can be examined and argued with, emerging only when the moment that requires them arrives. He looked at the mountains. "There's nothing for me in Cheyenne," he said. "There's Adler. You were at Copper Ridge. You were a witness. Whatever he can do for me with the contract, he might be able to do something more for those 11 families with an actual witness who is still willing to speak." He was very still. She had not planned this argument either, but she had thought about the newspaper clipping under the woodpile, and the paper he had burned in the night fire, and the particular quality of a man who carries something he has not been able to put down, and cannot put down alone. "That inquiry was 7 years ago," he said, "and those families are still wherever they ended up without resolution. A good lawyer looks for what's still movable. Maybe Adler can't do anything, but you won't know until you ask him." He looked at the south-southeast fork in the track. "I haven't been to Cheyenne in 4 years, he said. "I know. It won't be the same as this." He gestured back toward the hollow, invisible now behind the ridge. "No," she said. "It won't. But this isn't sustainable forever either, and you know it." It was a blunt thing to say, and she said it bluntly because he was not a man who benefited from the padded version of a true thing. He was quiet for a long time. A bird called somewhere in the trees above them. A jay, indignant about something the way jays always are. "Half a day back to the hollow to close it up properly," he said finally. "Another day to Cheyenne from here if the ground holds." "Day and a half total," she said, roughly. She looked at him. He was looking at the south-southeast fork with an expression she could not entirely read, which was not unusual with him. But underneath the expression she could see the thing she had come to recognize in the last 5 days as his version of having decided something, a particular setting of the jaw, a quality of the eyes that was subtly different from their ordinary steadiness. "I'll need to go back for the supplies," he said, "and the other bow, and there are things that need doing before I leave the cabin for the winter that weren't done yet." "How long?" "If I move quickly, I can be back at this fork by midday tomorrow. You should keep going today while the light is good. I'll catch you up on the wagon road." She looked at him. "You'll catch me up," she said. "I said I would." She held his gaze for a moment. He did not look away. "All right," she said. She picked up her carpet bag. "I'll wait at the wagon road if I reach it before you do." "Don't wait in the open," he said. "Find the tree cover on the south side of the road. Better if whoever left those tracks doesn't see you first." She nodded. She started down the south-southeast fork. She did not look back. She had said the true thing, and he had received it the way he received everything without performance, and there was nothing left in that direction worth turning around for. The fork in the track was behind her. Cheyenne was ahead. That was the whole of the geography now. She walked. The creek was where he had said it would be, a narrow thing running clear over stones, the sound of it steady and particular under the quiet of the morning. She kept it on her right and followed the track he had described, reading the ground the way he had been teaching her all week, without either of them naming it as teaching. She had been walking for an hour and a half when she heard the horses, 2 of them from the sound. Coming from the north, from the direction of the ridge she had crossed that morning, moving at a pace that was not rushing but was not wandering either. The pace of people who have a direction and are keeping to it. She moved off the track and into the tree cover before she had finished deciding to which she thought her mother would have approved of. She stood among the pines with the creek sounds covering some of the horse sounds, and she waited. They came into view around the bend in the track above her. 2 men. One older, 50 or thereabouts, heavy through the shoulders, a face that had been outdoors a long time and showed it, wearing a coat that had seen serious use and a hat pulled down against the cold. He rode with the ease of someone who has spent enough time on horseback that it stopped being a skill and became simply how he moves through the world. The other was younger, mid-30s, less weathered, sitting his horse with the stiffness of someone not entirely comfortable with the work. He was looking at the ground, reading the track. The older man stopped. He sat on his horse in the middle of the track and looked at the tree cover on either side of him with the attention of someone who does this for a living and has learned to notice the difference between empty trees and trees with something in them. He looked directly at where she was standing. She did not move. He said to the younger man, without taking his eyes off the trees, "She came this way." The younger man looked up from the track. "You sure? Tracks are fresh. Half hour, maybe less." He paused. "She's in the trees." Ruth stepped out. She kept both hands visible and the bow slung over her shoulder with the strap across her chest. Not a weapon being drawn, not a surrender posture either. Just a person standing on a track in clear morning light, accounting for herself. The older man looked at her. She looked at him. "Ruth Calloway," he said. "That's my name," she said. "You have the advantage." "Cy Dugan," he said. He did not say who had hired him. He did not need to. "I've been asked to find you." "You found me," she said. He studied her from his horse. Not the way the men in Millhaven looked at her, the dismissive inventory of a person they have already categorized. This was professional assessment, the reading of a situation by someone who has read many of them and made his living by reading them accurately. "You're a long way from Millhaven," he said. "I am." "You've been in the mountains." "Several days." He looked at the bow on her shoulder, at the carpet bag, at her face, which she kept neutral and steady. "Harlan Wick sent me," he said. "He has a contract." "He has a document," she said, "signed by a man who had no authority to sign it. My stepfather is not my father and never has been. He has no legal standing to enter into any agreement on my behalf." Dugan was quiet. The younger man looked between them. The contract was witnessed and dated, Dugan said, not as an argument but as a statement of what he had been given to work with. "By whom?" she said. He looked at her for a moment. "A notary in Millhaven," he said, "who works for Eldon Price's freighting company," she said. She did not know this for certain. She was making an inference from what she knew about the way her stepfather conducted his business, which was to say, entirely within the circle of people who owed him something. She kept her voice even and let the inference sit. Dugan's expression shifted. Not much, but she had been watching people's faces across kitchen tables and boarding house counters for her entire adult life, and she could read a small shift. "Mr. Wick is a man of some standing in Chadron," Dugan said. "I'm sure he is. He can use that standing to recover his payment from Eldon Price, who took his money under false pretenses." She looked at Dugan steadily. "I never agreed to this. I was never asked. I found the contract by accident and I left. That is the whole of it." Dugan sat on his horse and she stood on the track, and the creek ran behind her, and the morning was very clear. "You have a plan," he said. It was not a question. "I do." "Cheyenne." She said nothing. He looked at his horse's neck for a moment, then he looked back at her. "I've been doing this work for 22 years, he said. I've brought back women who wanted to be brought back and women who didn't. I've handed people over when I should have looked more carefully at what I was handing them into." He paused. "I am getting old enough to look more carefully." She waited. "The notary you mentioned," he said. "If Price's own employee witnessed that document, it's not worth what Wick paid for it." "No," she said. "It isn't." He was quiet again. "Do you want to go back?" he said. The question surprised her by its directness. Not its content, which she had anticipated, but the way he asked it, plain and without the weight of an expected answer pressing on it. "No," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. The younger man beside him was looking at Dugan, now waiting. Dugan reached into his coat and brought out a folded document. He looked at it. He turned it in his gloved hands. "I'll report I didn't find her," he said. He looked at her. "Wick will have to take the matter of his money up with Price, which is where it belongs." He put the document back in his coat. She looked at him. "Why?" she said. He looked at the mountains behind her, at the bough on her shoulder, at the carpet bag in her hand. "Because you answered me straight," he said, "and because you came out of the trees on your own terms." He looked at the younger man. "In 22 years I have learned that a person who comes out of the trees on their own terms is not a person who was wrongly fleeing." He gathered his reins. "Good luck in Cheyenne, Miss Calloway." He turned his horse north. The younger man followed without speaking, though he looked back once at her before the bend in the track took them. She stood on the track alone. The creek ran behind her. The mountains were still in the morning light. She could hear the horses moving away, the sound of them diminishing in the way of all sounds in mountain country, gradually absorbed by distance and terrain until there was no sound left, only the morning itself, which had been here before any of them and would be hereafter. She picked up her carpet bag. She started walking. The creek bent sharply east after another 40 minutes, exactly as he had said it would. She left it and held south, reading the ground the way he had taught her. And after 2 miles, she saw the chimney rock on the ridge to her right, a column of limestone standing separate from the hillside, shaped by nothing but time and weather and its own particular geology. She looked at it for a moment, then she walked on. The trees thinned, the ground leveled. The mountains fell away behind her into the middle distance, where they became the scenery they had always been from Millhaven's kitchen window, beautiful and unspecific, and no longer something she was inside of. The wagon road appeared in the late afternoon, 2 ruts through the grass frozen hard by the season running east to west, and she could see to the east the faint smudge on the horizon that might be the beginning of settlement or might only be weather. Either way, it was direction. It was a thing to move toward. She went to the south side of the road and found the tree cover he had told her to find a stand of cottonwoods with enough density to provide concealment without obscuring her view of the road in either direction. She set her carpet bag down. She sat on it. The afternoon light moved. The temperature dropped with it. She ate some of the jerked venison from the bundle he had packed, and she watched the road and the sky and the mountains behind her, which from this distance looked like something you might choose rather than something you had fallen into. She waited. The sun was an hour from setting when she heard the horse. One horse, coming from the north from the direction of the mountains, moving at a pace that was steady and purposeful and familiar to her in the particular way that a pace can be familiar when you have been listening to it for 5 days. He came out of the tree line to the north of the road. He had a pack horse with him, a second animal loaded with what she imagined was everything in the cabin worth bringing. The cabin itself he had apparently prepared for winter in the time he had, though she would not know what that preparation looked like and did not need to. He saw her in the cottonwoods. He crossed the road and stopped the horses at the tree line. She stood up. He looked at her, then at the road behind her, then at her again. "Dugan found you," he said. It was not a question. "Yes. And he went back north," she said. "He said he'd report he didn't find me." Silas looked at the road for a moment. "He's a fair man," he said, "for the work he does." "I thought so." She picked up her carpet bag. "How is the cabin?" "Closed up. Fire out shutters up, the meat and the cash is covered." He paused. "It'll keep." She looked at the horses. She looked at him. "You came," she said. He looked at her steadily. "I said I would," he said. She looked at the road running east. "Adler's office," she said. "Do you know where it is in Cheyenne?" "On Cary Avenue. I know the building." "Then you know where we're going." "I do." She looked at the mountains one more time. They were going purple in the last of the afternoon light, the snow on their peaks catching something from the sky above, that the sky itself was no longer showing the last of the sun held in the high places after it had let go of everything lower down. It was the kind of thing you notice when you are leaving it, which is perhaps when it most deserves to be noticed. She turned east. He brought the horses alongside her. They walked together into the last of the afternoon light, the wagon road straight and clear before them, the mountains at their backs, and somewhere ahead in the direction they were moving whatever came next, which was more than either of them had been able to say with any certainty for longer than was comfortable. The road was cold and the light was going, but it was good ground, clear enough to see where you were going. That was enough to start with. Cheyenne announced itself before it was visible. The smell came first. Coal smoke and horse and the particular smell of a place where many people live close together, and the ground has absorbed years of their presence. Ground does in settlements of any size, taking on a quality that open country never has. Not unpleasant exactly, but unmistakable, the smell of human density. Then the sound which was not one sound but a layering of them, wagon wheels on frozen road. The distant hammer of a blacksmith voices carrying without words across cold air, a dog somewhere making its opinions known about something. Then finally the buildings themselves appearing at the edge of the plain as they came over a low rise in the road, first the water tower and the tall false fronts of the main commercial street. Then the spreading grid of lesser structures beyond houses and sheds and the skeletal frames of things still being built. Cheyenne, in November of 1880, being a city that had not yet decided how large it intended to become and was erring on the side of ambition. Ruth had not been to Cheyenne before. She had been to Laramie once 3 years ago on a freighting run with Eldon that had required an extra hand for 2 days and for which she had not been paid but had at least seen something beyond Millhaven's single street. Cheyenne was larger than Laramie by enough that the difference was qualitative rather than merely quantitative. It had the feeling of a place that expected things from itself. She rode on the pack horse which Silas had redistributed the load from to make room the supplies rearranged into a more balanced configuration with the ease of someone who has packed animals for years and understands weight and balance as physical principles rather than calculations. She had not asked to ride. He had looked at the distance remaining and the condition of her boots, which had been wet twice and dried badly and were beginning to show it at the left sole, and said simply that the horse could carry her for the last few miles without trouble. She had accepted without argument because her feet hurt and because accepting practical help from a person who offers it practically without theater is not the same as depending on them. They came into the city from the north, which took them along a residential street before the commercial center houses of varying ambition set back from wooden sidewalks, a school building with its bell tower, a church whose congregation had apparently decided that height was a virtue worth investing in, the steeple rising above everything around it with the confidence of a statement rather than a structure. He rode without looking at things the way a person looks at novelty. He knew the city. He moved through it with the attention of someone navigating a known space, reading the streets for changes since his last visit, noting what was new and what was gone with the calm inventory of a man who has learned not to be surprised by what time does to places. She watched him watching the city. "Different than the mountain," she said. "Everything is different than the mountain," he said. "That's not always a complaint." She looked at the street. A woman in a good wool coat was coming out of a dry goods store with a wrapped package under her arm, moving with the purposeful stride of someone who has a list and is working through it. 2 men in front of the hardware store were having a conversation that involved a lot of pointing at the building across the street. A boy of about 10 was sitting on the edge of the wooden sidewalk, eating something from a paper bag with the total absorption that children bring to food they have chosen for themselves. Ordinary city life. The ordinary life of people who had a place in it. She thought about what her place in it might look like. Not the imagined place, the one she had been constructing in her head across the mountains and the wagon road, but the actual place, which would be determined by what Adler could do and what work she could find, and how far $7.40 stretched in a city that smelled of coal smoke and ambition. She had been constructing that place in her head for a week now, and she was aware that the construction was part of what had kept her moving. The mind needs something to walk toward. She had given hers Cheyenne and a kitchen and a beginning, and those things had served their purpose, which was getting her here. Now that she was here, the construction needed to meet the actual city, and she was prepared for the adjustment that would require. "Adler's office," she said. "Cary Avenue." "2 streets east," he said. "We'll stable the horses first. There's a livery on Grant I've used before." The livery was where he said it was run by a man of about 60, with a precise gray mustache, who recognized Silas with the nod of someone who has filed a person away as reliable and retrieves that assessment without needing to revise it. He took the horses with the manner of a man who regards animals as his primary responsibility, and people as a secondary inconvenience, which Ruth found entirely reasonable. They left the livery with their bags. The street outside was busy in the way of a city in the middle of the afternoon, people moving with the directional certainty of those who know where they are going. The sidewalks wooden and mostly sound, the road between them, frozen mud that had been frozen mud long enough to achieve a kind of stability. The cold here was different from the cold in the mountains. Less clean, more complex, mixing with smoke and breath, and the heat that leaked from buildings, a city cold that contained more of human life than the high country kind. She walked beside him on the sidewalk. She was aware of how they looked. A large man in mountain clothes with a pack over his shoulder, and a woman who had been in those same clothes for 5 days walking beside him carrying a carpet bag and a bow. She had not yet found a way to pack that didn't make her look like she was preparing for a siege. She was aware of this, and did not particularly care, which was its own kind of information about how the last 5 days had changed something in her accounting of what mattered. "Before we go to Adler," she said, "I need to find somewhere to stay tonight, a boarding house." "There's one on Ferguson that was decent 4 years ago," he said. "We can check it on the way." She looked at him. "And you," she said. "I know a man who runs a freighting operation out of the south end of town. I've done some work for him over the years. He has a bunkhouse." He looked at her. "I'll be fine." She nodded. They found the boarding house on Ferguson, which was run by a woman named Mrs. Hennessy, who had the organized efficiency of someone who has been managing other people's requirements for long enough that she has reduced the process to its essential components. She looked at Ruth with the frank assessment of a woman who takes in boarders and has learned to read the ones who will be trouble from the ones who won't. She showed Ruth a room on the 2nd floor. It was small and clean and had a window that looked out over the backyard, where a line of washing had frozen solid in the shape it had been hanging in when the temperature dropped, shirts and stockings stiff and three-dimensional like a ghost laundry. $1.50 a week, Mrs. Hennessy said. "Breakfast included. Supper if you give me notice by noon." "I'll take it," Ruth said, "for a week to start." She paid from the tin, $5.90 remaining. Mrs. Hennessy left her with a key and the information that supper was at 6 and she would need to provide her own soap. Ruth set her carpet bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the room. It was the first space that was entirely hers since she had left Millhaven. Not borrowed, not conditional on her usefulness, paid for with her own money and belonging to her for the week she had paid for it. She sat with that for a moment. Then she stood up, straightened her coat, picked up her carpet bag, and went back downstairs where Silas was waiting on the sidewalk. "Ready?" he said. "Yes," she said. They walked to Cary Avenue. Thomas Adler's office occupied the 2nd floor of a building on Cary Avenue that also housed on its ground floor a land title company and a telegraph office, 2 businesses that between them dealt in the most fundamental currencies of the frontier, which were where things were and how fast information about them could travel. The arrangement struck Ruth as either accidental or very deliberate, and she could not decide which. The stairs to the 2nd floor were on the outside of the building, a wooden staircase with a railing that had been repaired recently on the left side, the new wood still bright against the weathered gray of the original. At the top of the stairs was a door with a frosted glass panel and the words, "Thomas Adler, Attorney at Law," painted on it in letters that were precise and undecorated, the lettering of someone who regarded ornamentation as a form of dishonesty. She knocked. The voice that said "come in" was old, in the way of a voice that has been used extensively for a long time and has developed the particular resonance of that use, deeper and more certain than a young voice and with less need to prove anything. She opened the door. The office was smaller than she had imagined and more crowded, not with furniture, which was minimal. A desk, 2 chairs for visitors, a filing cabinet of significant age and apparent capacity, but with paper. documents in organized piles on every surface, folders stacked with the precision of someone who knows exactly where everything is and would notice immediately if anything were moved. The walls held bookshelves, and the bookshelves held law books whose spines were worn in the way of books that are used rather than displayed. Thomas Adler was behind the desk. He was 70 or close to it. His hair was white and cut short. His face had the lined quality of a man who has spent decades concentrating on things that require concentration. The lines not of age alone, but of sustained particular attention. His hands on the desk were large and very still, the hands of someone who has learned that unnecessary movement is a form of imprecision. He looked at Ruth. He looked at Silas standing behind her. He looked at Silas for a longer moment, and something moved through his expression that was not quite recognition, but was in the neighborhood of it. "I know you," he said, not a question. "Copper Ridge," Silas said. 1873. I was a witness for the families. Adler looked at him for another moment. "Morrow," he said. "Yes." Adler looked at his desk. He looked back at Silas. He did not say he was sorry, which Ruth noted and respected, because Adler was clearly not a man who said things he did not mean, and sorry from the man who had argued the other side of that case was a thing whose meaning he would have had to decide on carefully before offering it. "Sit down," he said, "both of you." They sat. He looked at Ruth. "Tell me what you need," he said. She told him. She told it in the order it had happened without embellishment, beginning with finding the contract and ending with Cy Dugan on the mountain track and his decision to report he had not found her. She gave him the facts in the way she had given Silas the facts, plainly, and without performing emotion about them, because the facts were sufficient on their own, and emotion added to them was not evidence, it was noise. He listened without interrupting. He made 2 notes on the paper in front of him. When she was finished, he held out his hand and she gave him the contract. He read it. He turned it over. He read it again. He set it down. "Eldon Price is listed here as your legal guardian," he said. "He is not my legal guardian," she said. "He was my mother's husband. My mother died 4 years ago. There was no legal proceeding establishing guardianship. I was 24 when she died and had been managing my own affairs for 2 years before that. You have no documentation of your age. My birth was recorded in the county records of Laramie County. I was born in 1852. I am 28 years old. I have been a legal adult for 10 years. He looked at the contract. "The witness is a notary named Garrett," he said, "from Millhaven. Eldon Price's freight company uses a notary named Garrett for all its business documents," she said. "I processed those documents for 2 years in the boarding house office." He made another note. "You processed his business documents," he said. "I did the books for his freight operation. Not officially. He did not pay me for it, but I did it." Adler looked at her over the top of his notes. "You have knowledge of his business practices," he said. "Considerable knowledge," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Miss Calloway," he said, "what is it you want from this specifically?" She had thought about this on the wagon road and in the boarding house room, and in the 5 days in the hollow, turning it over and looking at its different sides. "I want the contract declared void," she said. "I want Harlan Wick to have no legal claim on me. I want Eldon Price to have no further ability to enter into agreements using my name." She paused. "And if there are other women in Millhaven or anywhere else in his reach whose names he might use in similar ways, I want that stopped." Adler looked at the contract. "The contract itself," he said, "is voidable on its face. You were never a party to it. You never signed it. There is no documentation of guardianship. A court would look at this for approximately 10 minutes before dismissing it." He set the paper down. "Harlan Wick's recourse is against Price, not against you. Wick is a fool, but that's his own concern." "And Price," she said. "That's more interesting." He looked at his notes. "If he has been using a business notary to witness personal documents, that notary has a problem. If he has been conducting business practices that don't hold up to scrutiny, which I suspect from your description is the case, then there are avenues." He looked at her. "It will take time, and it will require your continued cooperation. You would need to remain in Cheyenne, or at minimum remain available." "I intend to remain in Cheyenne," she said. He looked at her steadily. "You're not asking me whether you should," he said. "No," she said. "I've already decided." I'm telling you so you know I'll be available." Something shifted in his face. Not approval exactly. The expression of a man who has spent decades watching people perform certainty and has learned to recognize the real thing when it walks into his office. "My fee," he said, "is normally $15 for initial consultation and retained services at a monthly rate thereafter." He looked at her. "Given the circumstances, which include the likelihood that a successful action against Price will produce information useful for other ongoing matters, I am prepared to defer the initial fee until the matter is resolved." She looked at him. "What other ongoing matters?" she said. He looked at Silas. She looked at Silas. Silas was looking at the window, or appearing to look at the window, in the way of someone who is actually looking at something that isn't the window. "Copper Ridge," Adler said, "has been a matter I have had reason to revisit several times in the 7 years since the inquiry." He folded his hands on the desk. "The man I represented at that inquiry was the owner of record. He has since sold his interest in the mine to a larger operation. The families of the 11 men who died received nothing from that sale, nothing from the original verdict." He looked at his hands. "I was young enough at the time of the inquiry to believe that winning an argument was the same as being right. I am no longer that young." The room was very quiet. Ruth looked at Silas. He was still looking at the window that wasn't the window. "What would revisiting it require?" she said, because she could see that he was not yet able to ask it himself. "A witness willing to make a new statement," Adler said. "The original testimony is on record, but testimony given under the pressure of a formal inquiry and testimony given at a distance of 7 years by a man who has had time to remember things he was too frightened to say clearly, the first time, are different documents." He looked at Silas. "I cannot promise an outcome. The original verdict stands, but the sale of the mine created a new legal entity, and a new legal entity can be approached in ways the original owner could not be." Silas turned from the window. He looked at Adler. "You argued against me," he said. "You made the case that the shaft collapse was an act of geology rather than negligence." "I did," Adler said. "I had been given documents that supported that argument. I later came to believe those documents were prepared rather than discovered." He met Silas's eyes. "I cannot undo what I argued. I can apply what I know now to what remains possible." The silence in the office had a particular quality, the quality of something that has been waiting a long time to occupy the space it is now in. Silas looked at his hands in his lap. He looked at Adler. "7 names," he said. "That I hired myself. I can tell you everything about each shift in the weeks before the collapse, what was reported to management and what the responses were, dates and amounts and the names of the men who delivered those reports." He paused. "I have had 7 years to go over it." "I imagine you have," Adler said. "What would you need from me?" "Come back tomorrow morning," Adler said. 9 o'clock. "Bring whatever you remember and as much time as you can spare. We will start from the beginning." Silas nodded once. Adler looked at Ruth. 9 o'clock for you as well, he said. "We will deal with the price matter first. It's simpler, and I prefer to establish the simpler things before the complicated ones." 9 o'clock, she said. She stood. Silas stood. At the door she stopped. "Mr. Adler," she said. "Cy Dugan, the man Wick hired to find me." "What about him?" "He let me go. He said he'd report he didn't find me." She paused. "If the Wick matter is pursued, his name will likely come up. I'd prefer it didn't cause him trouble." Adler looked at her. "A man who declines to deliver a person to a void contract is exercising judgment, not breaking faith," he said. "I doubt Wick will pursue it. A man who has already lost his investment tends to cut his losses rather than extend them." She nodded. They left the office and went down the outside stairs into the cold of Carey Avenue. She stood on the sidewalk. He stood beside her. The street was doing what streets do in the late afternoon of a cold day, people moving with the particular efficiency of those who want to be somewhere warmer than where they currently are, collars up, breath visible, the city's noise lower and more purposeful than it had been earlier. She looked at the building they had just left. "You didn't know he felt that way about it," she said. "About Copper Ridge." "No," Silas said. "Does it change anything for you?" He thought about this with the seriousness he gave to questions that deserved it. It doesn't change what happened, he said. It changes what might still happen. He looked at the building. Those are different things. Yes, she said. They are. He looked at her. You pushed me toward this, he said. It was not an accusation. I suggested it, she said. You decided. The distinction is finer than you're making it. Maybe, she said. But the decision was yours. What happens tomorrow at 9 o'clock is yours too. He looked at the street. Are you hungry? He said. She realized that she was extremely hungry in the way that becomes apparent all at once after being managed for a long time by the demands of other things. Yes, she said. There was a place on Ferguson I remember, he said. Near the boarding house. If it's still there? It was still there. A small restaurant that smelled of onions and coffee and the kind of food that is made by someone who learned to cook in a domestic rather than a professional setting and has brought that knowledge to a commercial space, which means the food has the quality of the real thing rather than the imitation. They sat at a table by the window and ordered from a woman of about 40 who moved with the efficiency of someone managing more tables than the room strictly required, and she brought them coffee first, which they both received with the gratitude of people who have been cold for several days. Ruth held the cup with both hands. He held his with one. She looked out the window at Cary Avenue, which they could see at the intersection to the north. What did you find when you looked for the families, she said. After Copper Ridge. The ones you told me you looked for. He turned his cup on the table. Caldwell's widow Mary went to her sister in Colorado. I found a letter from the sister. She was working as a seamstress in Denver. The children, 3 of them, were in school. He looked at the table. Reyes had no family here. He'd come up from New Mexico. I couldn't find where his people were. He paused. The Garrity brothers. Their mother, Nora Garrity, went to live with a daughter in Laramie. I wrote to the daughter. She wrote back once to say her mother was alive, but that the family preferred no contact with anyone from the mine. He said this last part with the flatness of someone stating a fact they have made peace with, but not without cost. That's fair, Ruth said. Yes, he said. It is. Did you tell Adler the names just now? Caldwell, Reyes, the Garritys? Not all of them. He has the original record. Tomorrow, she said. Tell him about Mary Caldwell in Denver and the daughter in Laramie. If there's any remedy available, the families need to know before anyone else. He looked at her. I was going to, he said. I know, she said. I said it anyway. He looked at his coffee. You do that, he said. Say things you were already thinking. Say things that are already decided as though they need saying. She thought about this. I spent 2 years in a boarding house where nothing was said that didn't need to be said twice, she said. I may have overcorrected. He looked at his coffee. The corner of his mouth moved in a direction that wasn't quite anything, and then stopped, which she had come to understand was as far as he generally went with that. The food came, roasted chicken and boiled potatoes and a dish of pickled beets that neither of them had ordered, but which the woman brought anyway with the manner of someone who has decided what the table needs regardless of what the table thinks it wants, and it turned out the beets were exactly right. They ate. Outside the window, Cheyenne moved through its evening. The light changed as the businesses began to light their lamps, yellow rectangles appearing in the windows along the street, the city shifting from its daytime self into its nighttime self, with the practiced ease of a place that has been making this transition long enough to do it smoothly. She ate the last of the pickled beets. He said, the freighting operation on the south end, the man I know there. He has been talking for 2 years about needing someone who can manage the books. She put her fork down. She looked at him. Is that an observation or a suggestion? She said. An observation, he said. That becomes a suggestion if you want it to. She thought about Adler and the deferred fee and the $5.90 and the week at Mrs. Hennessy's and the kitchen work she had been planning on. What does it pay? She said. I don't know exactly, more than a kitchen. He's a fair man with money. You keep saying people are fair, she said. Dugan is fair. Adler is honest. This man is fair. I've known them all long enough to have an opinion, he said. Or you've been alone long enough to give people the benefit of the doubt. He considered this. Maybe both, he said. She looked out the window. I'll think about it, she said. After tomorrow, He nodded. They finished the meal. She paid her half before he could offer to pay the whole, which she could see him considering, and she paid it without comment, and he accepted it without comment, and that was the end of it. Outside on the street, the cold had come down fully now, the night temperature of Cheyenne being a different and more serious proposition than its daytime cold, and she pulled her coat around her. 9 o'clock, she said. 9 o'clock, he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. The hollow will be cold tonight, she said, not because it was relevant, but because she was thinking it. It will, he said. The shutters I put up will help, and the cash is well covered. She nodded. She was thinking about the fire in the stone ring and the tin plates on the hook, and the particular quality of the silence in the hollow in the early morning before anything had started. The silence that had felt after the first day, less like absence and more like a kind of presence. The silence of a place that has been inhabited long enough to have absorbed something of the person who lives in it. She thought about the bow leaning against Mrs. Hennessy's wall in the room on the second floor, which she had not found a way to store that didn't make it the most prominent object in the room. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said. She walked back toward Ferguson Street. She did not look back. She went up to the room on the second floor, and she sat on the edge of the bed in the lamplight, and she looked at the wall, and she thought about tomorrow and Adler's office and the 9 o'clock that would begin whatever this became. She thought about Silas Morrow walking to the south end of town in the cold, to a bunkhouse at a freighting operation to a man he knew from the years before the mountain. She thought about the Garrity brothers and Mary Caldwell in Denver, and the daughter in Laramie who had written back once and then not again, and she thought about what it would mean if Adler could find something still movable after 7 years. And she thought about Silas sitting in that office tomorrow morning, giving his account of things he had been over in his head so many times that they had become a kind of furniture of his interior life, always there, always in the same place. She thought about what it costs to carry something that long, and what it might cost to put it down. She lay back on the bed fully dressed and looked at the ceiling. Outside, Cheyenne went on with its night. She listened to it for a while. The city sounds that were so different from the mountain sounds, the human density of it, the complexity of a place where many lives were being lived simultaneously in close proximity, each one separate and each one in some way touching the others by accident and intention, and the plain fact of proximity, the way all dense living works. She was part of it now, not in the way she had been part of Millhaven, which was to say not as furniture, not as a function performed for other people's benefit and otherwise invisible. She had paid for a room with her own money, and she had sat across from a lawyer and stated her case without apology, and she had eaten a meal that she had half paid for, and she had said goodnight to a man on a street in a city she intended to stay in. None of these things were large. All of them were different from what her life had been a week ago. She thought that was worth something. She thought it was in fact the most important kind of worth, the kind you can't be given and can't have taken away because it doesn't live in what you have, but in what you have done. She fell asleep with the lamp still burning. She woke in the dark after it had burned out and lay for a moment in the complete unfamiliar dark of the room, disoriented, reaching for the sounds that would tell her where she was. Not the mountain, no creek, no owls, no cold coming under a door that faced north. The city. The muffled sounds of a place that never goes entirely quiet. A horse somewhere. A door. Someone's voice at a distance, one word audible, nothing more. Cheyenne. She was in Cheyenne. She turned on her side and pulled the blanket, which was thin but adequate, around her shoulders, and she closed her eyes and thought about 9 o'clock and what she would say and in what order, and she let the thinking organize itself into something useful, and then she stopped thinking and slept. She did not dream. Outside her window, the frozen washing in the backyard stood in its ghostly shapes through the night, stiff and three-dimensional and patient, waiting for the morning that would not be warm enough to soften it, but would at least be the morning which is its own kind of answer to whatever the night has been asking. The city held her. It did not yet know her name. It would. The sign above the door said nothing fancy. Ruth had considered briefly giving the place a name that meant something with her mother's name in it, or a reference to Wyoming, or any of the small gestures toward meaning that businesses sometimes make. She had decided against all of them. The sign said Calloway's Kitchen in letters she had painted herself on a piece of pine board, and that was sufficient. People who needed to find it would find it. People who didn't know what it was yet would figure it out when they smelled what was coming through the door. It was the second week of May, 1881. 6 months, give or take a few days, since she had walked into Thomas Adler's office on Cary Avenue with mud still on her boots and a void contract in her pocket, and the particular posture of someone who has decided not to be afraid of what comes next, even if they haven't entirely convinced their body of this yet. A great deal had happened in those 6 months. Most of it had been work. Adler had been thorough. That was the word for it. Not fast, not dramatic, not the sudden reversal of fortune that stories tend to promise, but thorough in the way of a man who has learned that the cases worth winning are won by accumulation rather than by a single argument landing correctly. He had filed the necessary documents to have the price contract declared void within the first 2 weeks, which was as simple as he had said it would be. A judge in Cheyenne had looked at it for less time than Adler had predicted, noted the absence of Ruth's signature, the absence of any guardianship documentation, and the presence of a witness whose professional relationship with one of the signing parties constituted a conflict that made the document unenforceable, and had dismissed it. Eldon Price had received notification by post. Ruth did not know what he had done when he read it. She found examining herself for feelings about this that she did not particularly need to know. Harlan Wick had sent one letter to Adler's office, a short and poorly reasoned attempt to argue that the contract should be honored on moral grounds, if not legal ones, which Adler had answered in 2 sentences and not heard from again. Wick was, as Adler had said, a fool. Fools cut their losses when the losses become embarrassing enough. The Price investigation had taken longer and was not yet fully resolved, but Adler had found enough in the records that Eldon's notary, a man named Garrett, who had apparently been witnessing documents of questionable legitimacy for Price's freight operation for several years, had agreed to cooperate with the inquiry in exchange for consideration of his own situation. 3 other women whose names had appeared in Price's correspondence in ways that suggested he had been considering similar arrangements had been contacted and informed of their legal standing. Ruth did not know any of them. She hoped the letters had been useful. The Copper Ridge matter was slower still, and the outcome remained genuinely uncertain, which Adler had told them from the beginning, and which both Ruth and Silas had accepted, because the alternative to uncertain progress was no progress, and no progress was not something either of them was willing to return to. What Adler had found working from Silas's detailed account of the weeks before the collapse and the documentation that had since become accessible through the mine's sale to a new ownership group was enough to file a civil claim against the successor company on behalf of the families of the 11 men who had died. Not a criminal action, not the thing that had been refused at the original inquiry. Something different, narrower, and Adler believed more likely to result in something the families could actually use. Mary Caldwell, the widow working as a seamstress in Denver, had been contacted. She had written back within a week, her letter short and careful and containing at the end a single sentence that Silas had read 3 times before putting the letter down. She said she had always believed someone would eventually look again. Nora Garrity's daughter in Laramie had not responded to the first letter. She had responded to the second 6 weeks later with a letter that was not warm but was not closed either. She wanted to know what was being asked of her mother, who was elderly and not well. Adler had written back explaining that nothing was being asked, only offered, and that the offer would remain open at whatever pace suited the family. That was where things stood. Uncertain, ongoing, and more alive than they had been in 7 years. Ruth thought about all of this while she worked, which is to say, she thought about it most of the time because she was almost always working. The kitchen on 3rd Street had been a storage room for a hardware concern that had moved to larger premises in February, leaving behind a space with a functioning hearth, a plank floor that needed work, and a landlord named Mr. Beckett, who was sufficiently motivated by the prospect of regular rent to agree to a 2-month trial before committing to a longer lease. Ruth had spent 3 weeks and the last of her savings making it into something a person could cook in and another person could eat in without embarrassment. She had done most of the work herself. Silas had done the parts that required reaching the ceiling. The freighting business on the south end of town, run by a man named Cord Halsey, whom Silas had worked with years before, had offered Ruth the bookkeeping position as Silas had said it might. She had worked there for 2 months, which had given her enough to put down on the kitchen space and buy the initial supplies. She had left Halsey's employ on good terms, which she knew because he had sent 3 of his drivers to Calloway's kitchen in the first week it was open and had told them apparently that the food was worth the walk. It was worth the walk. She had made sure of it. The morning Mrs. Osgood walked in. Ruth was at the hearth turning a pan of cornbread that she was testing a new ratio on more fat, less meal to see if it changed the texture in the way she was hoping. The breakfast service had ended an hour ago and the lunch preparation had not yet fully begun, and the kitchen was in the brief quiet between which was the time she used for experiments. She heard the door. She turned around. Mrs. Vera Osgood stood in the doorway of Calloway's kitchen looking at the room with the expression of someone who has found an unexpected thing and is taking their time deciding what to make of it. She was smaller than Ruth remembered, or perhaps Ruth had simply not looked at her carefully enough, before the way you don't look carefully at the furniture of your daily life until it appears in an unfamiliar context. She was using a cane that she had not been using in Mill Haven. Her back apparently had continued to have opinions. "I thought it might be yours," Mrs. Osgood said, "when I saw the name." Ruth set the pan down. "How is your back?" she said. "Worse than it was and better than it will be," Mrs. Osgood said. "That's the trajectory." She looked at the room. At the tables, 4 of them with mismatched chairs that Ruth had acquired from 3 different sources, and that did not look mismatched because she had painted them all the same dark green. At the board on the wall where the day's offerings were written in chalk. At the hearth where the cornbread was cooling. "You built this." "I rented it," Ruth said. "Then I built it." Mrs. Osgood moved to the nearest table and sat down with the careful economy of someone managing pain that has become a negotiation rather than an emergency. She set her cane against the table edge. "My daughter is in Cheyenne now," she said. "Married a man who works for the railroad. I came to visit." She looked at Ruth. "I found the boarding house sold to new owners, and the kitchen cold in the mornings, which I had not thought I would miss." Ruth brought 2 cups of coffee to the table and sat down across from her. Mrs. Osgood wrapped both hands around the cup. She looked at Ruth over the rim in the way of someone who has something to say and is deciding how to say it. "I knew about the contract," she said. Ruth looked at her. "Not before you left," Mrs. Osgood said quickly. "After. Eldon came looking for you 3 days after you were gone. He said things." She looked at her coffee. "I told him I didn't know where you'd gone, which was true. And I told him that if I had known I would not have said, which was also true, and which I think he understood because he did not come back." Ruth thought about this. "You lost a cook," she said. "I lost more than that," Mrs. Osgood said, not looking up from the cup. "I lost the person who fixed the loose stairboard and left the coffee grounds out every morning and never once asked to be thanked for it." She paused. "I should have thanked you for it." Ruth looked at the old woman across the table. The years of the boarding house were in her face, the particular kind of tired that comes not from any single thing, but from the long accumulation of managing a place and the people in it, the kind of tired that doesn't fully go away with sleep because it lives in a deeper layer than sleep reaches. "You gave me a room when I needed one," Ruth said. "And you taught me the cornbread ratio when I was 12 years old, and you didn't have to do that either." Mrs. Osgood looked at the pan cooling by the hearth. "You changed the ratio," she said. "More fat," Ruth said. "Less meal. I'm testing it, Mrs." Osgood stood with some effort and went to the pan and broke off a corner piece and ate it standing there. She chewed carefully in the way of someone applying genuine critical attention. "It's better," she said. She sounded slightly annoyed about this. Ruth almost laughed. She was closer to it than she had been in a long time. "Sit down," she said. "I'll bring you the rest of it." Silas came in at the usual time, which was late afternoon when the lunch service had ended, and the kitchen was in its second quiet of the day. He came in the same way he had come in every Friday for the past 4 months. Boots loud on the plank floor because he had not learned to soften them, and she had stopped expecting him to have in his hand the look of a man who has been outside all day and has arrived somewhere that is warm and smells of food and does not require anything from him he isn't prepared to give. He stopped when he saw Mrs. Osgood at the corner table. Mrs. Osgood looked at him with the frank assessment of a woman who has been evaluating men for 50 years and has simplified her criteria considerably in the process. "This is Silas Morrow," Ruth said from the hearth. "He is the reason I got to Cheyenne with both my boots still attached." "One boot was in trouble," Silas said to no one in particular. "The left one," Ruth agreed. Mrs. Osgood looked between them. Something moved across her face that she did not attempt to conceal, the expression of a woman who has seen enough of the world to recognize a particular configuration of two people in a room and to find it satisfying without needing to say so. "Sit down," Ruth said to Silas. "There's soup." He sat at his usual table. She brought the soup. She brought Mrs. Osgood a second cup of coffee without being asked, because the first one was empty, and that was the kind of thing she noticed. The three of them occupied the kitchen in the late afternoon light which came through the two front windows at an angle that made the room look better than it was. The green chairs and the chalkboard and the cooling pans on the hearth shelf all softened and warmed by it. Mrs. Osgood finished her coffee. She put on her coat with the slow care of someone for whom dressing and undressing have become logistical rather than routine. She picked up her cane. "The cornbread," she said to Ruth. "Leave it as it is. Don't go changing it again." "I wasn't planning to," Ruth said. "Good." She looked at Silas. "The soup was good too." "I didn't make the soup," Silas said. "I know, Mrs." Osgood said. "I was complimenting the establishment." She left. The door closed behind her. Ruth stood at the hearth and looked at the door for a moment. Then she picked up the cloth she had set down and wiped down the counter that did not need wiping, which she did sometimes when she needed her hands to be doing something while the rest of her settled. "Good woman," Silas said. "Yes," Ruth said. "She is." She turned around. He was looking at her with the expression she had come to know best over the past 6 months, the one that was not quite readable and not quite unreadable, the one that existed in the space between what he was thinking and what he was prepared to say about it. She had spent a long time learning to be comfortable in that space, and she was mostly there now. "Cord has work through the summer," he said. "Survey work north of here. 2 months, maybe 3. She looked at him. "When?" she said. "End of the month." She thought about the kitchen and the Friday afternoons and the soup that was ready at the usual time. "And after," she said. "After," he said, "I come back." She held his gaze for a moment. He did not look away, which he never did. "The Garrity family," she said. "Did Adler hear back?" "This morning." He turned his cup. "Nora Garrity died in March. The daughter wrote to say her mother had known at the end that someone was looking into it. The daughter said that mattered." He paused. "She is willing to be included in the claim." Ruth stood very still. "That's good," she said. "It is," he said. She turned back to the hearth. The soup needed stirring, which it didn't, but she stirred it anyway and thought about an old woman in Laramie who had known at the end that someone was looking, and thought about the 11 names that Silas had been carrying for 7 years, and thought about what it means to put something down, not because it is resolved, but because it is finally in the right hands. She thought about her mother's pistol, cleaned and oiled, sitting in the trunk in the room above the kitchen that served as her quarters now. She had not needed it since the mountain. She thought she would keep it anyway, not because she expected to need it, but because her mother had been right that a tool properly maintained is a different thing from a burden. She thought about the wagon road and the cottonwood trees, and the moment she had heard one horse coming from the direction of the mountains at the pace that was steady and purposeful and familiar in the way a pace becomes familiar when you have been listening to it for the right amount of time. She set the spoon down. She turned around. He was still at his table, both hands around the cup, looking at the middle distance in the way he had, the way that meant he was somewhere between here and whatever he was thinking about. "End of the month," she said. He looked at her. "End of the month," he confirmed. She nodded. Outside Cheyenne was doing what it did in the late afternoon of a May day, the light long and the air still carrying the last of the winter's edge in its lower layers, but warm enough above that the difference was noticeable, the particular temperature of a season in the process of becoming something else. The street outside the 2 windows was busy with people moving through the end of their working day, and the sound of it came through the glass, muffled and ordinary. The sound of a city that had absorbed 2 more people into itself and was going about its business without particular comment. Ruth untied her apron and folded it over the shelf edge. She went to the window and looked out at the street. She thought about the voiceover she would never give, the tidy summary of what her life had become, the sentence that would wrap it all up and tell whoever was listening what it had meant. She had no such sentence. She had a kitchen on 3rd Street and a chalkboard and 4 green chairs, and a man who came on Fridays and was going north for the summer and had said he was coming back, and she had a lawyer on Cary Avenue working through a claim that might or might not come to something for 11 families who deserved more than they had received, and she had $5 and some change in a tin that had once held $7.40 and had been emptied and refilled several times since. She had a city that was beginning to know her name. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, a considerable amount of something accumulated the way all real things accumulate, not in a single moment but over time, decision by decision, morning by morning, 1 cup of coffee at a time. She looked at the street until she had finished looking at it. Then she went back to the hearth and started on tomorrow's prep, because there was work to do, and she was the person who did it. And that had always been, when she examined it honestly, one of the best things she knew about herself. Behind her, Silas finished his soup. The kitchen held them both. It was by any reasonable accounting enough.